Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Connor Matthews had built a solid life in Philadelphia. At 30, he worked as a civil engineer at one of the city's largest construction firms, contributing to projects that reshaped the urban skyline. His apartment in Rittenhouse Square was modern and cozy, with large windows that let in the morning light. It was the kind of place he and Melissa had chosen together 3 years earlier, when they'd gotten married in a simple but heartfelt ceremony at Independence Hall. Melissa was 29, worked as a marketing manager at a boutique agency, and had that kind of contagious energy that drew people to her. She was sociable, decisive, and Connor had always admired her loyalty to her friends. Maybe he'd admired it a little too much. Melissa's best friend was Rachel Porter. The two had known each other since college at Temple University and shared an almost symbiotic closeness. Rachel worked as a freelance graphic designer and had been married for 4 years to Mark, a quiet accountant at a downtown firm. The problem was that Rachel had a reputation everyone in their social circle knew about: she was unfaithful. Not once, not twice, but chronically and almost compulsively. Connor had lost count of how many times, at dinners or social gatherings, Rachel told stories about misunderstandings with other men, always with that knowing smile that made it clear she knew exactly what she was doing. Poor Mark always seemed to be the last to find out about each episode. What always bothered Connor deeply was Melissa's stance on all this. Whenever someone criticized Rachel, even subtly, Melissa would explode in her friend's defense. "You don't know what goes on inside a marriage," she'd say with a vehemence that seemed disproportionate. "No one has the right to judge. Relationships are complicated." Connor tried to understand. After all, loyalty among friends was admirable. But there was something about the intensity of her defense that made him uneasy, as if Melissa were defending not just Rachel, but some larger principle he couldn't quite grasp. Things came to a head on a rainy Tuesday in October. Connor was coming home from work when he got a text from Melissa: "Mark kicked Rachel out. She's staying with us for a while." It wasn't a request. It was a statement. When Connor got home that night, Rachel was already settled in the guest bedroom, with 2 large suitcases and the look of someone unjustly wronged. Melissa was making tea in the kitchen, gently consoling her friend with soft words about controlling men and toxic relationships. Connor greeted Rachel with forced politeness and retreated to his office. Something about the whole scene bothered him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. In the days that followed, the dynamic in the house changed completely. Melissa and Rachel became inseparable. They'd leave together in the mornings for the gym, even though Melissa had never been particularly dedicated to working out. They'd come back late at night, always with excuses about girls' dinners or emotional therapy sessions for Rachel. Connor tried to be understanding. Rachel was going through a difficult divorce, it was natural she'd need support. But small details began to pile up like stones in his pockets, growing heavier by the day. There was the perfume. Melissa had worn the same delicate floral scent for years, something Connor strongly associated with her. Suddenly, she started coming home with a different smell, richer, almost too sensual for simple dinners among friends. When Connor mentioned it, she just shrugged. "Rachel let me borrow hers. I wanted to try something new." The explanation was plausible, but something about the way she avoided his gaze made Connor file that moment away in his memory. Then came the expenses. Connor had always kept their finances organized, and he started noticing strange charges on their shared card. Ubers to addresses he didn't recognize. Expensive restaurants downtown. A $220 charge from a boutique hotel in Old City. When he asked about it, Melissa explained she was helping Rachel cover some costs. "She's broke until she sorts things out with Mark. I can't just leave my best friend stranded." Connor nodded, but started monitoring their statements more closely. Their behavior changed too. There were hushed, conspiratorial laughs between them, conversations that stopped abruptly when Connor walked into the room. Phones always face down on the table. Texts that made Melissa smile in a strange way, with a twinkle in her eyes that Connor hadn't seen directed at him in months. One night, he woke up at 3 a.m. and noticed Melissa wasn't in bed. He found her on the balcony, talking softly on the phone, laughing gently. When she noticed him, she hung up quickly. "It was Rachel, having an anxiety attack," she said. "I came out so I wouldn't wake you." But Rachel was just a few feet away in the guest room. That was the last straw. The next morning, Connor made a decision. He knew a private investigator through a coworker who'd gone through a messy divorce. Liam Chen was discreet, efficient, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Connor hired him on a Monday, providing photos of Melissa and Rachel, descriptions of their cars, and approximate times of their nighttime outings. 72 hours, Liam said. "If there's something going on, I'll find it." Connor spent those 3 days in a state of controlled anxiety. He kept up his normal routine, going to work, coming home, having dinner with Melissa and Rachel as if nothing were wrong. But he watched everything with new eyes. The way they dressed before going out, always coordinated, always impeccable. The smiles they exchanged. The constant texts. It was like watching a movie he'd never really been part of, just an extra in the background. On Thursday afternoon, Liam called. "I've got what you need. It's not pretty." They met at a quiet cafe near Connor's office. Liam handed him a thick manila envelope. "Sorry, man. I always hope I'm wrong in these cases." Connor waited until he was alone in his car to open it. The first photos showed Melissa and Rachel entering an upscale bar in Manayunk, both dressed provocatively, very unlike Melissa's usual casual style. In the next shots, they were seated at a table with 2 men. One was tall, with dark hair and an expensive suit. The other was blonde, athletic, with a confident smile. The 4 were chatting animatedly, drinking red wine, laughing. The next photos were worse. Melissa and the dark-haired man leaving the bar hand in hand. Rachel and the blonde close behind, also linked arms. More shots in sequence, all 4 entering a boutique hotel in Rittenhouse, just 6 blocks from Connor's apartment. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m. Other photos showed the same couples leaving the next morning. Timestamp, 8:15 a.m. Melissa was wearing the same outfit from the night before. Liam's report was detailed and methodical. This had happened at least 5 times over the past 3 weeks. The men were businessmen who frequented the same bar. Liam's report also included copies of texts between Melissa and Rachel, which he'd obtained through a source close to those involved. "Tonight's going to be amazing. Justin said he booked the suite you love." Another message from Rachel replied, "Perfect. Greg's already looking forward to it. Best plan we've come up with." Connor felt his stomach tighten, not with immediate sadness, but with a cold, calculating anger. It all made sense now. Melissa's obsessive defense of Rachel wasn't about friendship loyalty. It was about complicity. Melissa defended Rachel because they were the same. Maybe they always had been. Mark kicking Rachel out hadn't been the beginning of anything. It had been an opportunity. Rachel wasn't staying at his place as a refugee, she was there as a partner in crime, facilitating meetups and providing mutual alibis. Girls' dinners was code for nights with Justin and Greg. The morning gym sessions probably didn't even exist. Connor took a deep breath. He needed to act smartly. There would be no yelling, no unnecessary drama, no giving them the satisfaction of watching him fall apart. He deserved better than that. He deserved dignity. He deserved justice. And justice would be served on his terms. On Friday night, Connor came home earlier than usual. Melissa and Rachel were in the living room, sitting on the couch, drinking white wine and watching some TV show. They looked relaxed, comfortable, with no trace of guilt or worry. "Hey, honey," Melissa said casually. "You're home early." Connor didn't respond right away. He walked into the kitchen, grabbed the envelope he'd left inside his work bag, and returned to the living room. He placed it on the center of the glass coffee table, right in front of both of them. The sound of the paper hitting the surface cut through the room like a blade. Melissa and Rachel looked at the envelope, then at Connor. There was a subtle shift in their expressions, a tension that hadn't been their seconds before. "What's this?" Melissa asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice wavered slightly. Connor crossed his arms and looked directly into his wife's eyes. There was no visible anger on his face, just a chill calm that was infinitely more unsettling. "Open it," he said simply. Melissa hesitated, then reached out and picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Rachel leaned in to see the contents at the same time. Connor watched the exact moment both of them realized what they were looking at. Color drained from their faces simultaneously. Melissa dropped the photos as if they'd burned her. Rachel brought a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. "Connor, I can explain," Melissa started, her voice now high-pitched and desperate. "It's not what you think." Connor laughed, but it was a humorless, dry, sharp laugh. "Not what I think?" "Melissa, there are photos of you two walking into a hotel with two guys at 11 at night and leaving the next morning. Do you think I'm an idiot? That I didn't notice 3 months of lies?" Rachel tried to stand, maybe to leave the room, but Connor raised his hand. "Sit. Nobody's leaving yet." His voice carried an authority he didn't even know he had. Melissa was crying now, tears streaming down her face that she made no effort to wipe away. "Please, Connor. It was a mistake. I was confused. Rachel was going through a hard time and I don't know what happened." Connor slowly shook his head. "Don't blame Rachel. You made choices. Conscious, repeated choices. You turned my home into a base of operations for your betrayals. And you know what's even more pathetic? You defended her. Nobody understands what happens inside a marriage, you always said. Now I get it. You defended her because you were the same. Because you cheated together." Rachel finally found her voice, and to Connor's surprise, she tried to attack. "Mark cheated on me first. I was getting revenge. And Melissa, she was just supporting me. It was the wrong thing to say." Connor turned to Rachel with pure contempt in his eyes. "What you did is pathetic. Mark never cheated on you. You made up that story to justify your affairs. And you," he turned back to Melissa, "believed her. Or pretended to believe her because it was convenient." Connor walked to the window, his back to both of them, taking a deep breath to keep his composure. When he turned again, his decision was made. "You have 10 minutes, he said, his voice calm but unyielding as steel. 10 minutes to pack your things and get out of my house. Both of you." Melissa stood shakily, as if she'd been punched. "Connor, no. Please. We can talk. Couples therapy. Anything. I love you." Connor looked at her as if she were a stranger. "You don't love me. Maybe you never did. And even if you do, you don't know how to show it in a way I can accept. I deserve something different from this." He glanced at the photos again. "And you know what? Looking at these pictures, I realized something. You're smiling in them. Genuinely happy. Happier than I've seen you smile at me in months. So don't insult me by saying you love me." He checked his watch. 9 minutes now. The two women exchanged glances, still in shock, trying to process what was happening. Rachel was the first to move, rising from the couch with difficulty and heading toward the guest room. Melissa stood frozen, trembling. "What if I refuse to leave? This is my house too." Connor waited until she finished before responding. "Legally, you're right. But I really suggest you leave now. Because in 15 minutes, the divorce attorney I hired yesterday will be here with the papers. And soon, your parents will know everything. I won't lie if they ask me what really happened. Do you want to be here for that conversation? Even as he said it, Connor knew there was a line he didn't want to cross. He didn't want to become someone cruel like they'd been. If he ever told Melissa's parents anything, it would be out of truth, not revenge. But she didn't need to know that now. Melissa's face crumbled completely. Mentioning her parents was the final blow. Her family was traditional, religious, conservative. They'd ask. And Connor wouldn't lie for her. You wouldn't do that, she whispered. Connor didn't answer, just kept staring at her with that impassive expression. It was answer enough. Melissa finally moved, rushing toward their bedroom, stumbling over her own feet. Connor heard the frantic sounds of both women in the hallway, drawers opening, clothes being tossed into suitcases. Rachel was sobbing loudly now, crying uncontrollably. Melissa tried to comfort her between her own sobs, but her words came out jumbled and meaningless. Connor stayed in the living room, motionless, counting the minutes in his head. In that moment, he discovered something about himself. He was stronger than he'd imagined. The pain was there, simmering, waiting to explode later when he was alone. But now, in this instant, he was pure resolve. 8 minutes later, both women appeared in the hallway with hastily packed suitcases, clothes draped over their arms, their faces wrecked by a mix of tears and panic. Melissa made one last attempt. Connor, please. Just let me explain properly. I'm begging you. Connor walked to the door and opened it. The cold October air rushed into the apartment. Leave. Rachel went first, nearly running, without looking back. Melissa hesitated in the doorway, turning one last time. I'm really sorry. I ruined everything. Connor held the door open, waiting. Yes, he said simply. You did. Melissa sobbed once more and stepped out. Connor closed the door behind them, locked it, and leaned his forehead against the cool wood for a long moment. The silence that filled the apartment was absolute and strange. Connor walked back into the living room, gathered the scattered photos from the table, and placed them back in the envelope. He sat on the couch where, just minutes earlier, his wife and her friend had been pretending at a normality that had never existed. He looked around the apartment they'd decorated together, now filled with memories that felt tainted and false. He finally let himself feel it. Anger came first, hot and violent, making his hands shake. Then sadness, deep and heavy, pressing down on his chest. And finally, surprisingly, a strange sense of relief. At least now he knew the truth. Connor didn't leave the apartment that weekend. He turned off his phone after 17 missed calls from Melissa and countless messages full of apologies, empty promises, and pleas. He didn't reply to any of them. On Monday morning, he went to see his divorce attorney, Richard Brennan, a man in his 50s with a reputation for being relentless but fair. Richard had already started the paperwork based on the evidence provided. Clear case of proven adultery, he said, flipping through the photos. In Pennsylvania, that significantly strengthens your position. We'll file for a fault-based divorce. You're entitled to a more favorable division of assets. Connor nodded. I want this done quickly. I don't want to drag it out for months. Richard made a few notes. Understood. I'll push hard. With this much evidence, her lawyer will recommend a settlement. Nobody wants this going to trial. They discussed the details. The apartment was in both their names, but Connor had paid the down payment alone with inheritance from his grandparents. Their joint bank account would be split, though Connor had already moved his personal funds to another account. There were no children, which tragically simplified everything. 2 weeks, Richard said at the end of the meeting. Maybe 3. She'll sign. Connor returned to work, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. His co-workers noticed something was off, but he skillfully avoided personal questions. He focused on his projects, working overtime, filling the void with structural calculations and architectural blueprints. The nights were harder. The apartment felt too big and too quiet. He started going to a nearby gym, channeling his anger into intense workouts until exhaustion granted him a few hours of sleep. It was during one of those sleepless nights that Connor got an unexpected call. It was Mark, Rachel's ex-husband. "Connor? Hope you don't mind. I got your number from a mutual friend. I heard what happened." Mark's voice was kind, understanding. "I wanted to talk to you. I think we've been through similar situations." They agreed to meet for coffee the next day. Mark was older than Connor expected, maybe 35, with gray already streaking his temples and tired eyes that had seen too much disappointment. They sat at a quiet cafe in Center City. "Rachel cheated on me 4 times that I know of," Mark began, stirring his coffee absently. "Probably more. I forgave her 3 times. Tried therapy, tried to understand. But the 4th time was too much. That's when I found out she was using our house for hookups while I was at work." Connor listened, seeing his own pain reflected in another man's eyes. "What surprises me," Mark continued, "is that she always had accomplices. Friends who lied for her, who created alibis. Your wife was one of them." "Sorry I have to say that." Connor shook his head. "I already know. They did it together. A mutual support system for infidelity." Mark sighed deeply. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. To tell you that you did the right thing. I waited too long, forgave too much. I became a doormat. You had the courage." They talked for nearly 2 hours. Mark shared strategies for how he'd rebuilt his life after the divorce. He'd started therapy, reconnected with old friends, even picked up photography as a hobby that helped him process his emotions. "It takes time," he admitted. "Some days are still hard. But it's better to be alone and at peace than constantly betrayed while you're together." Connor thanked him for the conversation. For the first time since the confrontation, he didn't feel alone on this journey. The following weeks passed in a blur of legal paperwork and tense negotiations through attorneys. Melissa tried to contact him multiple times, but Connor kept everything strictly through Richard. At first, she tried to fight back, claiming Connor was being cruel and vengeful, but when Richard threatened to make the evidence public in court, she backed down. The settlement was signed in a cold, impersonal meeting room. Melissa looked visibly diminished, with deep dark circles and mismatched clothes. She tried to speak to Connor when he walked in, but he simply looked through her as if she were transparent. The divorce was finalized in just over a month, which Richard considered extremely fast for a case like this. Connor kept the apartment after financially compensating Melissa for her share. She took her car and half the joint account. "She got lucky," Richard remarked as they signed the final documents. "With this evidence, you could have pursued damages for emotional distress. But you were fair." Connor wasn't interested in financial revenge. He just wanted it over. 3 months passed. Connor sold the apartment. He couldn't live there anymore, every room held memories now poisoned. He bought a converted industrial loft in Northern Liberties, a revitalized neighborhood with a young, vibrant atmosphere. The space was completely different, with high ceilings, exposed brick, and large windows flooding everything with natural light. He decorated minimally, keeping only what was essential. It was a physical fresh start that symbolized an emotional one. He also started therapy, following Mark's suggestion. Dr. Patricia Horvath was an experienced psychologist specializing in relational trauma. In their sessions, Connor explored not just the betrayal, but what had led up to it. "You ignored the signs," Patricia said gently during one session. "Not out of stupidity, but because you trusted. Trust isn't weakness. She's the one who abused it." Those words freed something in Connor. He wasn't guilty for having trusted. She was guilty for betraying that trust. Connor also reconnected with friends he'd neglected during his marriage. He realized, with some shame, that Melissa had subtly isolated him from several people over the years, always with excuses about how she didn't like so-and-so. Now he understood, she wanted fewer witnesses, fewer people who might notice inconsistencies. He started playing basketball with old college friends on Thursdays, attended work happy hours he used to skip, and even joined a running club that met on Sundays. It was during one of those runs, 6 months after the divorce, that Connor met Alicia. She was a nurse at the University of Pennsylvania hospital, with brown hair pulled into a ponytail and a genuine smile that reached her eyes. They ran side by side for a few miles, chatting about small things, then grabbed coffee afterward. Alicia was also divorced, for different reasons, and there was a mutual understanding between them about invisible scars and rebuilding. Connor didn't rush. They got to know each other slowly, building a friendship first. Alicia knew his story. Connor told her everything on their third outing, and she listened without judgment. "You deserved better," she said simply. "And you still do." It wasn't pity, it was recognition. For the first time in a long while, Connor felt he might be able to trust again. Not blindly, not naively, but with wisdom born from pain. 9 months after the confrontation, Connor was at a cafe near his new job when he saw Melissa. She was alone at a corner table, idly scrolling through her phone. She'd cut her hair short and looked thinner, almost fragile. He could have left without being seen, but something made him pause, curiosity, maybe. She looked up and saw him. Recognition was instant, followed by a complex mix of shame, sadness, and maybe even hope. Connor walked over to her table, not for reconciliation or forgiveness, but for something like closure. "Connor," she said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't expect to see you." He didn't sit down. "How are you?" The question was polite, not warm. Melissa gave a sad smile. "Surviving. I ended up quitting my job. The story got out at the agency, the atmosphere became unbearable, so I resigned myself. I'm trying to start over." She hesitated. "And Rachel, she's pregnant. By Justin, the guy from the bar. He wants nothing to do with her." Connor processed the information without any particular emotion. It was karma, maybe, but he didn't take pleasure in it. Just confirmation that choices have consequences. "I'm sorry for you," he said, and it was partly sincere. He didn't feel pity, but he recognized her flawed, broken humanity. Melissa looked at him with glistening eyes. "You look good." "Better." Connor nodded. "I am better. It took time, but I am." An awkward silence hung between them. Melissa finally said what she needed to say. "I ruined the best thing I ever had. You were too good for me, and I didn't appreciate it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I get it. I know what I lost." Connor studied her for a moment. There was sincerity there, but it was also too late. "I believe you," he said finally. "But that doesn't change anything. You made your choices. I made mine. We're on different paths now." He turned to leave, but Melissa called out again. "Connor?" He stopped, not fully turning around. "You're going to be happy. You deserve to be happy." It was a strange thing to hear from her, almost absurd, but Connor accepted it with a nod. "You deserve to find who you really are too," he replied. "Without lies, without games. Good luck, Melissa." And then he walked away, leaving her behind in every sense. Connor returned to his loft that night with a strange feeling of completeness. The cycle was closed. He didn't hate her anymore, he didn't feel anger or anything but quiet peace. He'd lost a wife, but he'd gotten himself back. He'd discovered reserves of strength he didn't know he had. He'd learned that trust is a gift, not a right, and that betrayal says more about the betrayer than the betrayed. Alicia was coming over for dinner, bringing Thai food she'd promised was the best in the city. He set the table, put on soft music, and looked out the window at the lights of Philadelphia starting to flicker on in the growing darkness. The city looked different now, full of possibilities instead of bitter memories. He'd survived. More than that, he was thriving. When the doorbell rang and he opened it to see Alicia's smile, Connor realized something fundamental: the end of something terrible had been the beginning of something better. Melissa's betrayal hadn't broken him permanently. It had bent him, tested him, but in straightening himself back out, he'd become stronger, wiser, more aware of his own worth. 10 minutes had changed his life that October night. But the months that followed had rebuilt it, brick by brick, choice by choice. And as he and Alicia laughed over something trivial in the kitchen, Connor knew with absolute certainty, he'd made the right choice. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about valuing yourself enough to accept nothing less than you deserve. And he deserved far more than lies and betrayal. He deserved peace, truth, and the chance to love and be loved without games or shadows. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that was possible. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.